The subcommittee will come to order. This is the third in a series of hearings on the Declaration of Principles signed by President Bush and Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki on November 26, 2007. Most significantly, the declaration suggests an indefinite U.S. military presence in Iraq. The Declaration of Principles is not just about military commitments, but also includes a broad political and economic agenda and obligations. I'd note for the record, on January 29th, Chairman Tom Lantos sent in an invitation to the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, asking her or someone she designated to testify at this hearing. The State Department responded that no representative would appear, that the American people have a right to be fully and directly informed as to the intentions of this administration regarding any agreement with the government of Iraq. American people have paid dearly for that right. Almost 4,000 of our sons and daughters have died in that conflict, and tens of thousands have been seriously injured. Possibly hundreds of thousands of innocent Iraqi civilians have been killed, and millions have been forced to flee their homes and are now refugees in neighboring countries. Secretary Gates appeared before the Senate and House Armed Services Committee on Wednesday and seemed to minimize the Declaration of Principles as nothing more than a press release. Now, on its face, this would appear to be a major reversal of the administration's position. So it's all the more important now to remove any confusion and explore the apparent contradictions between the Declaration of Principles signed by our President, George W. Bush, and the testimony of Secretary Gates. Our witnesses today will address at least four main questions. Question one, what is a status of forces agreement, and can it provide authority for U.S. forces to engage in combat in or on behalf of another country? Dr. Douglas Macgregor, a retired Army colonel with a distinguished record in both combat leadership and military strategy, and someone who has negotiated, served under, and implemented status of forces agreements, will focus his testimony on that question. Second, if, as the Declaration of Principles implies, the agreement were to include a commitment to defend the Maliki government against internal and external enemies, could it be carried out by the administration alone, or would Congress have to approve it as a treaty or a congressional executive agreement? Constitutional scholars Una Hathaway, a professor at the Yale Law School, and Michael Glennon, a professor at the Fletcher School of Tufts University, who has counseled to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, helped craft legislation in this area, will address that question for us. Question number three, what consultation is required with the Congress by law and by State Department regulations on both the form of the agreement and the issues to be negotiated, and has such consultation occurred? Professor Matheson, let's see where I am here, and former State Department legal advisor Michael Matheson, who is now a professor at the George Washington University Law School, will assist us in this matter. And finally, question number four, what procedures must be followed within the executive branch as it makes decisions on what form the agreement should take and on how the negotiations are to be organized, and have they been properly taken to date? Professor Matheson will walk us through these procedures. I note that he can also guide us through the implications of terminating the UN mandate and perhaps other UN resolutions regarding Iraq as contemplated in the Declaration of Principles. This is an area that really has not been reviewed. And we're very pleased also to have the benefit today of testimony on any and all of these questions from our witness who has been suggested by my friend and colleague, Mr. Rohrabacher, Professor Ruth Wedgwood of Johns Hopkins University, who has served in a variety of administration legal positions.
Mr. Chairman, I have supported the Iraqi war from the beginning. I also support the Constitution of the United States and what it says about the role of the United States Congress. It is unacceptable, Mr. Chairman, that you, the chairman of this Oversight Committee, had to find out about a bilateral security agreement and the negotiations that were going on between the United States and Iraq by reading it in the newspaper. And also, it is embarrassing for me, as someone who worked in a Republican White House for 7 years, I worked in the Ronald Reagan White House for 7 years, and to find out that the administration officials continue to ignore your requests for participation in an open discussion and dialogue about issues that are of such significance to our country. This attitude breeds mistrust on the part of Congress, and it undermines the public's trust in this administration. If the people of the United States believe that there are deals being reached behind closed doors and that there hasn't been proper discussion, we would not have the public support necessary to be successful. And that's the difference between a society that doesn't rely on public opinion and the democratic process, and those societies that are dictatorships.
George Bush was not elected President of the United States to be King of the United States. There are 3 separate branches of government, equal branches of government. And while we recognize that the executive branch does have a lion's share of the responsibility in foreign policy, there is an important role.
And that I do not see that this president is respecting the constitutional authority and duties that we have as members of Congress, and that is demonstrated by the fact that today we don't have someone here from the administration, and have not had in our hearings before, a representative here to have some dialogue about what should be the goals in Iraq and what is trying to be accomplished in these negotiations. Well, after months of congressional and public pressure, this administration has recently shed some light on the Declaration of Principles bilateral security agreement, as it's called. 2 days ago, Secretary Gates appeared before the Senate Armed Services Committee and said there will not be a long-term agreement that commits the United States to defend Iraq without a vote of Congress. Yesterday, we were offered a secret briefing on this issue. I did not attend that secret briefing, as you did not as well. No, secret briefings don't make it in a free society. Yes, there may be some elements to what's going on that need to be said in secrecy, and we have no problem with that. But obviously, there are very significant elements to the negotiations that are going on that do not need to be secret, and it should instead be part of a public discussion.
I, too, am concerned about the security commitments and assurances that our nation plans on providing according to this declaration. And as has been described as well, when you take a look at, quote, defending Iraq's democratic system against internal, external threats, what are these undefined threats? Would we be obliged to preemptively strike Sunni fighters beyond Iraq's borders?